Mountain Slayer Garage, and today we're looking at 2023 G5 850 Turbo. I did an episode a week or so ago on how to remove the hood and the muffler and on the G5s, and then how to put it back on. And pretty much that was more in preparation for this video. This year, since the G5's come out, it's been a great machine. The power upgrade on the Turbo 850 motor has been a really nice add compared to the G4 turbo motor. And the chassis just is so much nicer, easier to carve, easier to boondock, and getting that technical tree right. It just really is a sweet sled. But it's had one kind of Achilles heel this year. I've seen all over social media and the forums is the chain case, something in it breaking. I don't know if we know exactly what yet. I've heard it's the chain, I've heard it's the gear, but anyway, something in there is letting loose. And so I wanted to, since I got about 400 miles on this, I wanted to pull my chain case cover off, look at my chain and gears to see if I can see any damage to anything. And then we can kind of go over the few things that we know that may be contributing to this, and maybe what can be done to rectify it. Because my biggest fear on this is I'm going to be out in the middle of nowhere on my snowmobile, and I'm going to have something in here, some catastrophic failure in my chain case. And a lot of times that means a helicopter ride out and at least probably a couple $1,000s to do so. If you're lucky enough, it's going to happen somewhere where you can easily tow it out. But knowing my luck, it's going to be a helicopter ride. And I really would like to avoid that. There's a couple fixes we know out for it right now. BRP hasn't addressed it yet that we know of. But anyway, we're going to pull the chain case apart on this, just kind of see if we can find any damage to the chain or the gear itself, or find anything that's loose in there. So we're going to look at that, see what we can find. I need to change the chain case oil on this anyway. You don't have to pull the cover off to do that, but I'm going to, just because I want to inspect everything. And then also I kind of want to see how much I can tighten the chain and tension it, and see how it looks with the cover off. And that's kind of the best way to really tighten your chain to know it's right where it should be, is with the cover off. But it's really kind of a hassle to do that, so most of us just do it with the cover on, with it just kind of go by feel. There's been a number of videos on this year on how to adjust your chain, because I think that's one of the problems of why this is failing. People aren't adjusting their chains. The chain is stretching and then failing. But on most of the pictures I've seen, the chain hasn't been the part that's broken. What's broken is the bottom gear. So I don't know if it's the chain or the gear or what in there. But anyway, we'll look into that. We'll show you how to adjust your chain. But we're also going to show you how to pull this apart and how to put it back together, so you know how to do that in the event that you want to look at this and check on this on your own. So let's go over to the TV. We're just kind of show you what we're talking about on this kind of catastrophic chain failure. We go over here to our TV. This is a picture I found on social media. You know, the chain case, got snow and ice on your running board, and the chain's still right here, but you can see the gear in there. It's all broken apart there. You've got this big gaping hole in there. And then if you look at this a little closer, you know, you can even see the part number there on the gear. And it's this whole jagged edge where this whole thing is just broken apart. And you really don't want to do this on the mountain, because it's really, really going to be a problem if this happens on the mountain. So the last is the chain and the cover off this. You can see the big hole in the chain case. The gear, the chain actually looks like it's intact, but all the gear is completely broken apart. And this is the one thing we'd really like to avoid, is having this kind of a failure happen in the backcountry. So we really kind of want to know how to fix it, how to address it, and how to avoid this. So let's go back over to our machine, and we're going to pull this chain case apart. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do here before we pull this apart is to drain all the oil out. And on the bottom of the chain case, we go back up under here. Right here, there's a little hole. Right here, there's a hole. And inside that hole is a little Allen-headed screw that you unscrew in order to drain the oil out. There's the same one over here on this side. If you look right here, it's the same thing right here. This is where the fill level hole. It's the same thing. It's a 3/16 Allen-headed bolt. So we're going to take that out of the bottom. We're going to drain the oil out of this. And we're just going to see maybe there might be some metal filings or something in that oil. So let's do that, and then we'll kind of see what our oil looks like, and then we'll go ahead and pull the cover completely off. Okay, now I got my little Allen wrench under here. I'm just going to get this out without dropping this bolt down into the oil draining. Now this little Allen-headed thing kind of looks like this. You don't want to lose that, so put it somewhere where you're not going to lose it, because it'd be difficult to find another one. And you know, this doesn't hold a lot of oil. Let's see how much we drained out of here. Probably about, according to this, not quite 300 cc's or 300 milliliters, just below. Anyway, that's how much came out. And if I put my finger down here, I don't find any little metal shavings or anything in there that makes it look like I'm losing anything or anything coming apart or rubbing in my chain case, which is really nice, because I don't want to. Next thing we got to do there is 9 10mm bolts around the circumference of the chain case, these silver-headed bolts here. There's 9 of those. We're going to pull those out. I've already gone over and loosened them. There's 2 40 Torx bolts. There's one right here in the center. There's one right here. Remember, when we take this one out, it's got a little brass washer underneath it, because this one actually goes through the chain case and it can leak there. So be careful with that brass washer that you don't lose it. And the last thing you want to do, up here we have our breather tube. This is where we're going to fill our oil at when we're done. So we want to pull off that little plastic plug. One of the other things we need, we're going to have, this is for our shot. Some of you may not have this if you just have a pull start. So with this, it's got this little red lock on it. We want to undo the lock and then pull that plug apart just like that. And that's just going to allow us to pull the cover off, and not without having to take the shot start off of this right here. And we can just leave that in place when we pull our cover off. I'm going to start with the Torx 40s and take these out pretty tight from the factory. I don't like using an impact wrench or something on these, because when the G4 first came out, we were taking one of these off. We stripped one of these Torx bolts on here, and it was really a pain to get it out and replace it. So I've kind of learned not to use any kind of power on these. And so we're going to take that one off. We're going to take the other Torx 40 off, and then we're going to take off all 9 of these 10mm bolts around the circumference of this chain case. Okay, now I have to keep track. When you take all these 9 10mm bolts out, there's 8 short ones like this one. There's 1 long one like this one. The long one goes down in here, and just keep track of where that long one goes so you put it back in the right place when you do this. Then there's 1 more 10mm bolt. We have all the bolts out of the chain case. You can see it's kind of loose, but there's 1 more bolt. This stirrup here, or rest, has a 10mm bolt here that goes into the chain case here that we need to take out in order to pull the chain case all the way off. And then there's one other thing we need to unhook. The speedometer cable right here is hooked onto the chain case, so we're going to have to unplug it. There's a little clip on this side. You push that down, but it's on the back side of this when you take that off. So we're all unhooked here, except for this one last 10mm bolt right here. So that's the last bolt in there. Chain case cover is loose. Now you will notice something interesting, that when you take off the 40 Torx, you can see some yellow Loctite on the threads there. But even though these little 10mm bolts are really tight, you don't notice any Loctite on them. And what that is, why that is I don't know if you can see this. If you ever take it apart, this bolt isn't round. The threads aren't round. They're almost triangular. And these are thread cutting bolts. Actually, this one has a special name for it. Because when they put this chain case together, if we pull our cover off, all the holes that those bolts go into, if you ever had to buy this piece new, and I only know this because I had to replace one once a few years ago, none of these bolt holes that the 10mm bolt goes in are threaded. When you install these bolts, they all cut their own threads into this. So if you ever have to replace it, that's what it is. And you can see I have pretty good tension on my chain already. I just tightened it before my last ride. That's probably why. But it's quite tight, which is very nice. And some of the other things I've been seeing with people with loose chains is they're saying that's rubbing down in here or along the back side of the chain case. But I don't see any rubbing of the chain that has been too loose on the inside of my chain case here or on the inside of my chain case over there. I'm going to pull my upper and my lower gear off and my chain off so we can inspect it. But I also want to look and see what they've done down here to this bottom part. That's one of their issues why people are kind of blaming this for having a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen my chain. You'll see this loosen as I turn this. This is the Torx bolt back here, the chain tensioner. And I'm just going to loosen that back. Now this is a 15mm bolt here. I've already loosened it and taken it off. So we pull that off on the bolt with the washer. You can see there's some good amount of yellow Loctite on it. And then, there's a clip on the bottom of this that you need to get your little pliers on. You get your pliers on like that and spread that apart. And that ring goes on down here. That's what holds your bottom chain on. So we're just going to kind of slowly wiggle this bottom one off. Take our top one off. I'm just going to set them down here on a rag so they don't get any dirt on them. And now when we inspect all this, we want to inspect the surface of this to make sure it's not worn. It's nice and smooth where the chain rubs against it. It's not very worn. I do have a little bit of a chain mark there. That bearing back in there is in place. The bearing here is in place. Now this is the problematic area where everyone says that this could be a problem. There's a two-piece design here this year where this outer ring here used to be part of the drive shaft that goes all the way across. This year, this is a separate part. The drive shaft comes in through some splines in the middle of it. Some people think that there is a issue with that as far as having a little bit of play in it. That allows this bottom gear to have a little bit of movement in it. I'm exaggerating there, but that's having a little bit of movement in it. And that little bit of movement is what's either causing the chain to come loose or this gear to break. If you look down here in the bottom, there's a little bit of wear right there where the chain's been hitting that. Maybe my chain was really loose at one point before this last time that I tightened it and was hitting on there. That's the only really way that chain could have got out far enough to make that mark, is if it was loose enough that it was hitting right there. So it looks like that the last time I tightened this, that I was maybe starting to get a little bit of a problem right there from my chain rubbing right there. Okay, now we're going to start putting all this back together. And the first thing I'm going to do, just because this is the easiest time to do this, the little drain plug that we took out of the bottom earlier, just because it's easy to see this and get it back into place, I'm going to reinstall this right now. You can put a little blue Loctite on this if you want, because you really don't want this falling out, but it shouldn't fall out because it's got a little tapered fit. So we got our plug back in. Now we're going to pick up our chain, put our chain in here. One of the issues that I didn't mention with this when we talked about the problems that could be with this, like we said, so problem number one I see coming up, people think that they aren't adjusting their chain and the chain is becoming loose. Like you see mine here, you had that mark down there. And if you're leaving it loose, it's going to get looser and looser and eventually something's going to break. That's the number one thing. The number two thing is Skidoo used a new chain and gears this year. They aren't as strong as the old chain and gears. It used to be when the turbo first came out in 2020 and a half, they used what's called the Hyvo chain and gears. The Hyvo chain and gears has always kind of been the gold standard for snowmobile chains. It's always the strongest and longest lasting and not supposed to have any stretch. This other style of chain is known to have some stretch and more failures than the Hyvo chain. So it could be the chain and gears that they're using this year. And the other thing that it's been blamed on is this two-piece design down here. So those are kind of the three issues that we have with this where we're thinking there's going to be some kind of a problem with this. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put this back in here. Adjuster, we'll put this top gear on, then we'll put the bottom gear on down here. All right, now we're going to put this bolt back in here. We're going to put some Loctite on it. We'll torque that bolt down to spec. We're going to put our clip back on here on the bottom gear with our little tool. There's a little groove in the shaft here where this goes in. You want to make sure, go around, make sure that snap ring snaps right down into the groove, because otherwise, you know, that could easily come off. So we've got the snap. Now we got our bolt torque down here, got our C-clip on, everything's back in place, but we just need to adjust this loose chain. So I got my 27 Torx. I'm just going to go down here to the adjustment screw, and you can see how loose that is. I'm just going to keep tightening this up until it's still too loose. That's even still too loose, because if we hit there, that's actually, you can see that's hitting the metal there. We don't want that loose, so keep tightening this up. And about that much movement, maybe a quarter of an inch at the most, maybe more like that. It's fairly tight there. We don't want it so tight, because too tight can cause problems as much as being too loose. So that's probably about where we want it. Now the other way to tell this is when you are on the other side of the machine, you can rock your secondary clutch back and forth. Set your emergency brake so your drive shaft doesn't turn. That means our only motion we're going to get is in the chain. And you can see I can hardly have any movement in that. That's with the chain tightened and tensioned about appropriately. I have my 27 Torx bit in here, and I've loosened the chain up to where it will touch the metal right there. Now we're going to go around to the other side. On the other side here, we're going to just show you how much. Now it doesn't move a lot. You can kind of see that I'm not getting a ton of movement out of it, even though the chain is too loose. So let's go over to the other side, and we'll tighten the chain back up where it should be. So if I tighten my chain up, you can see the chain tension tighten there. Now that's probably pretty close to where we want to be. Now if we go over to the other side again, you can see I just have barely any movement in it at all. You almost can't even tell that it moves back and forth, rocking it, trying to rock it back and forth like this. So if you have a lot of movement, like if you can move a ½ inch this way and a ½ inch that way, your chain's way too loose. I mean, I maybe have an 1/8 of an inch. If you look at one of these fins, maybe an 1/8 of an inch from forward and back rock, maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8. And that's probably about where you want to be based on our chain tension with the chain case cover off. Everything's torqued down and tightened, and the chain's tension to where it should be. The last thing before we put our cover back on, there's a rubber gasket that goes all the way around here. You just want to inspect that, make sure there's no cracks or damage to it, because you're going to want to replace it at this point if there is. But on a new machine like this, there really shouldn't be any cracks or damage to it. So we're just going to take this kind of slowly, put it down in there, put it back on where it's supposed to be. First screw I'm going to put in is the one that goes here. This is the one that has the brass washer on it. And that's just kind of hold everything kind of right in place where I want it. So it's going to make sure that all the other stuff is lined up. And I want to make sure nothing of these other wires that I unplugged are stuck in between the two chain case halves. And that's as easy as that is. We're going to go back. We're going to put all of our bolts back in. We're going to torque everything down. We're going to put all of our electronics back where they came off at. Remember, this one has this little red lock on it. We want to lock that one in place. Fill our oil here, and we'll show you how to do that in a minute once we have all the bolts all bolted up on this. Okay, so the last thing we got to do, we got our bolts put down. These are all just put down finger tight. We need to torque down the chain case bolts. There's the 9 10mm bolts, and then there's the 2 40 Torx bolts. Now, if you look up the torque sequences, I'm going to put the sequences up on the screen here. A special sequence in where you're supposed to torque these in. So when you torque them, follow that sequence. Starts with number 1 and goes all the way around to bolt number 11. The next thing is the torque specification. You'll notice on the 10mm bolts, there are 2 torque specifications. And why that is, remember when we talked about these 10mm bolts cutting their own threads when you first put them into a fresh chain case? What happens when you first put these in, they're going to be tighter because they're cutting threads. So the first chain case torque on a new chain case is going to be tighter than if you're using your existing chain case. So you're going to see 2 different chain case torques on there, and you're just going to want to use the ones appropriate for you. Most of us aren't going to use the new one because we're using a chain case that's already been used. So those are the 2 things as far as the chain case torques go. So follow the sequence and then use the correct torque. If we go into our owner's manual has all kinds of fun information in it as far as what oil to use and what type of oil to use. So on page 208, this is my operator's guide that came with my sled. It says the recommended chain case oil, XPS synthetic chain case oil, or if that's not available, use 7540 gear oil that meets GL5 specification. Not all of us are going to have access to the XPS right away. I just bought some full synthetic 75140 at the auto parts store that has the same specification that Ski-Doo recommends here, the GL5. And so either oil is fine. This synthetic oil's about half of what the XPS synthetic oil costs, so there's also a fairly significant cost difference. Not that big a deal since we're working on a $20,000 machine. If you can get the XPS, you probably should, but I just didn't have access to it quickly and easily enough to when I this video, so I'm going to use the other oil. How we fill this is right down here where the little plug was, we took out, that's our fill line. So as we are going to put oil in right here, as that fills up, slowly as we get to the 350 milliliters that Ski-Doo recommends, it's going to, when it fills up to here and starts getting there, it's going to start to leak out there. That means we're full. We can put that in, put our rubber cap back on there, and then we're all done with the fill process. All right, now we're going to start putting our oil in. 350 milliliters is what it says in the operator's manual to put in here. That's about not half this bottle. So far, we've put in about 250 milliliters, so we're probably pretty close to being full. Probably start seeing the oil come out there here pretty quickly. You can see that we're draining out there. Probably overfilled a little bit. All right, so we've got our little Allen plug. We're just going to plug that back in there now that our flow has slowed down enough that we're probably right about our fill level. Now, this has a special torque on it, too, that's in your owner's manual as well. And you'll want to torque that down also to the appropriate torque. Okay, now we're all finished with this. Everything, we just got to go back, make sure everything's plugged in. Our caps are back on, put our muffler on, our hood and our side panels, and we're all done. We're going to go test this thing. Hey, I just want to finish up the video with mention a few things. If you're just watching this video and you want to do this to your sled, but you're not really sure how to get the muffler off and the hood off, I just made a video that I put out a couple weeks ago that shows you how to take the hood off and the muffler off, whether you have a turbo or a non-turbo. So look at that one. I think it's called G5 hood and muffler removal. Also, I've watched this kind of on social media, this chain case problem with Ski-Doo and the G5 sleds unfold this year. And I've seen people kind of, oh, this is an isolated problem, you know, every once in a while a sled's going to have a breakdown. Huge, enormous amount of sleds breaking their chain cases this year. I've been snowmobiling for almost 25 years. I've personally never seen a sled lose a chain or a chain case. I see reports of it from all brands over the last 20 years, here and there, but never have I had as many as I've seen this year with the G5 Summit. I could combine all the chain case failures I've seen in the last 20 years, and by far this year, just the G5 Summit is totally outnumbered all of those in 20 years. So there definitely is a problem, whether you want to think it's just an isolated problem or not. It's something that Ski-Doo is going to have to address and fix. Also, while I was making this video, I noticed if any of you watch Muskoka Freeride series, they actually dropped a video in the last week or so called Two Sleds, One Helicopter, where they blew up their chain case on their G5 out riding in Canada. So check out that video and look and see what happened. It's kind of the same thing with the other pictures I've showed you. You'll see the pictures here where the chain case broke open, bottom gear came apart, but the chain stayed intact. They had a helicopter this sled off the mountain. On the same video, they also had a Polaris 9R blow up its P22 clutch, which is another video I'm going to be making here in the next couple of weeks about the Polaris P22 clutch that came out this year, but that's another topic. So anyway, this is definitely a problem. Do we know why it's happening? Ski-Doo used a new chain and gears this year. Maybe the number one thing. We don't know 100% for sure. That combined with the new two-piece drive shaft down on the bottom has something to do with those two things in combination with each other. Maybe with the chain getting loose and stretching. Fixes for this, TKI fix if you want to keep your chain and gears. They're the only one I've seen so far with the fix for it. Or if you want to get rid of the chain completely and go to a belt drive, there's a number of companies that make belt drive. TKI makes a great one. Mountain Valley Motorsports makes a belt drive, and so does Specialty Sleds in Canada. Those are 3 companies making belt drives. So or you can just keep an eye on your chain like I'm going to do. Make sure your chain is tensioned correctly whenever you go ride. And so anyway, we got to watch this. I really don't want to have a breakdown out in the mountains, because in the mountains there aren't a lot of people here that can come helicopter you out. The last time I had a sled helicoptered out, it was 5 years ago, and it was really hard to track down someone that could do it, and it cost over $1,000. So you really don't want to have to do that. And it's sometimes, depending on where your sled breaks down, it's really the only way of fixing it, especially when you have a pretty catastrophic failure like your chain case coming apart. So like the video, share the videos. We'll see you next time on Mountain Sledder Garage. Have fun out in the mountain. It's a great winter. We're right in the middle of winter, and these G5s are really a fantastic machine. I really love my G5 Turbo. It worries me a little bit every time I take it out because of that chain case issue. So see you next time on Mountain Sledder Garage.